It was all done in a hurry, really. My employers had just acquired a much smaller concern that had recently gone bankrupt. I think the company probably got everything on the cheap from the administrators. Although my employer had been very successful and completely swamped with work in recent months, our management team were in a bit of a panic trying to get their new acquisition up to speed and up and running. So we were sent there to reassign staff and oversee the installation of our company's systems. In short, chaos reigned for several weeks. There was virtually no time for planning. Everything was done on the fly, right down to replacing the new owner's computer network, which was not extensive enough, and adding all the necessary wiring. In short, the 10 of us ran around the city like blue flies during the day and literally gathered in the bar of our hotel to plan what was going to happen the next day. None of us lived more than an hour away by train, but we all often stayed in town for these much-needed evening meetings. One or two team members managed to escape home to see their wives and families, but the choice of those who could afford it depended on what was happening that day and the next morning. Anyway, feeling pretty tired, I had already been sitting at the hotel bar for about half an hour waiting for the rest of the team to show up when Sherry walked into the lobby. Sherry was one of the computer nerds hired by a specialized company to help set up computer systems and train staff on how to use them. She took me by surprise when I realized exactly who had entered the bar. Sherry definitely didn't look like the nerdy girl I knew well, the one who spent all day teaching new employees how to use our company's systems. Gone were the baggy sweater, knee-length skirt, and glasses, replaced by a teasingly short skirt and a teasingly well-fitting silk blouse. She didn't look around and survey the establishment as one might expect. Sherry simply settled on a bar stool and ordered a drink. I figured she was waiting for someone, probably wondering which of my married coworkers was going to hit the road. Okay, I'll admit it. I got up from the table like a hamstring and very quickly lowered myself onto the stool next to Sherry. "Hey, beautiful, what's a pretty girl like you doing in a backwater like this?" I asked. Sherry turned and looked in my direction, apparently intending to give me an angry look and maybe tell me where I could cut loose. But then she recognized me. "Oh God, Steve, stop fooling around. What are you doing here?" She grinned. "I'm staying here, Sherry," I said, gesturing for the bartender to put her drink on my tab. "Hey, I asked you first anyway." "I'm meeting John, one of those electrician guys, for dinner. He lives in town and will pick me up from here. I thought you computer guys were all staying in Connote." "Yeah, but John doesn't need to know about that, does he?" She winked at me. "Besides, the fewer people who know I'm dating, the better. I don't date coworkers from my company. It leads to too many complications." "Ah, does that explain why you hide your light in the office?" "I don't know how I'll feel about it. I guess I'll take it as a compliment." "It sure is, Sherry. Now that you're sitting here, I can see what you look like and how skillfully you disguise yourself. Boy, you've disguised yourself well, girl. Poor John's going to get the shock of a lifetime when he gets here." She grinned. "Most of the people I teach to run our systems are men, Steve. Let's just say they take instructions much better when they're looking at a monitor rather than trying to sneak a peek at my divine riches. Now you know the secret to my business success, Steve." "Yeah, it felt pretty damn good when I realized it was you sitting there." "Man, don't give me that, Steve. I'll bet you were watching my every move, and that it took you longer to raise your gaze to my face." "Yes, I admit it, and who can blame me for that? Sherry, you are a fine example of your sex. Too bad you don't date your coworkers." I smirked at her. "Steve, you've always been a charmer, even for that weirdo in the office. But remember, you don't work for the same employer as me, so technically we're not coworkers." "What a charming idea, Sherry, but there's one catch. I'm married." "Damn, just when I thought I'd get lucky." She grinned. "But if you ever get bored with married life, you know my company's phone number." We joked in the same vein for another 20 minutes, until eventually Sherry's date showed up. And when he recovered from his shock, they left together. I bought myself another drink and went back to my table in the corner to wait for my coworkers. I don't know, probably about 10 or 20 minutes later, I went to the restroom. While I was in there, another guy came in and started using the urinal next to mine. "Pretty girl," he commented. Excuse me? I said, not sure I heard him correctly. It's always a little uncomfortable when a complete stranger strikes up a conversation with you in the men's room. You never know what their motives are. But I tried to remain polite. That girl you were talking to at the bar is very pretty, the man clarified. Yes, very, isn't she? Are you in town on business? He asked as I started to wash my hands. Yes, we're opening a new branch in town. Married? Yes, but why do you ask? Oh, I was just thinking. Married men away from home have to watch who's watching them when they're talking to pretty girls in hotel bars. By then, the guy was washing his hands, and I was drying mine under the fan. I was chronically confused by him. I was trying to figure out if he was a weirdo trying to pick me up or an unlikely pimp looking for business for his girls. Are you implying something? Yes. You've been to the bar 3 nights this week, and whenever you're there, so is that little shit in the other corner. Haven't you noticed him? No, I really don't understand. What are you trying to say? As soon as you started talking to that girl, he started fiddling with his phone. What's more, when you go up to your room in the evening, he goes out to the lobby and stays there until midnight. By then we had already left the gentleman's, and the guy told me he couldn't say anything more because he thought the thug hiding in the corner might have spotted him. He asked for my cell phone number and said he'd call me in a few minutes, then walked out the front door of the hotel. Confused, I returned to my seat at the bar, still trying to figure out why I had given a complete stranger my cell phone number. True to my word, a few minutes later my phone rang. It was the same guy, and he asked me to just sit quietly and listen, and then told me an almost unbelievable story. He went door to door for quite a while, but the gist of his story was that he had recently been stitched up by his ex-wife. He said that while on a business trip, he innocently struck up a conversation with a pretty young woman sitting at the hotel bar. The conversation revealed that she had come to the bar to hide from her abusive ex-husband, whom she had managed to figure out on the street before he could spot her. It hadn't occurred to my gullible new acquaintance that sitting on a stool at the bar wasn't the best place for her to hide. If he hadn't been so fascinated by her attractive looks and history, he might have realized that the best place for her was a dark corner. As it was, she pointed out the marks on her face and hands that made him assume that someone had recently abused her, and accordingly, he swallowed her story like a hook, line, and bloody sinker. She then suddenly announced that her husband was about to enter the bar and fled through a door at the back of the room. Fearing for her safety, my new friend followed her and quickly discovered that she was trying to hide in an alcove in the hallway. He offered to get her a room for the night where she could hide, but she insisted she couldn't go out into the hotel lobby because her ex-husband would surely see her. Yes, even I guessed what would happen next. After much discussion, it was decided that the girl would take the key from him and hide in his room while my new friend booked her own room. He would then give her the key and she could hide there for the night. That's exactly what happened. As soon as he gave the girl the key, she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek in gratitude, after which he escorted her to her room and went straight back to his room. The next morning he did not see the girl and treated the incident as a slightly costly delusion of old-fashioned chivalry. Feeling quietly pleased with himself, he thought the incident was over, but it was not. A few days later, unpacking his suitcase, his wife discovered a pair of women's underwear at the bottom of it, and then all hell broke loose. A few days later, he was served with divorce papers, and in them he discovered that a certain young woman had admitted to having sexual relations with him in the hotel room that night. What's more, there were pictures of him with this young woman at the bar, as well as entering and or leaving his room. He claimed that the whole pantomime was set up by his wife and her lover, who he later learned was her boss at the place where she worked before the children came along. While he had no proof of that fact, neither did he have proof that his wife had been intimate with this guy until their divorce was finalized and they were officially separated. The bastard was at her house when the judge ordered the separation, and I was banned from going near the house because the cow claimed I threatened her with violence. Now, she has a house because I have to provide accommodation for the children until they come of age. I'm burdened with child support, child maintenance, and this damn house, And all the while, that asshole is sleeping there with my ex-wife. I understand your obvious frustration, my friend, but what does this have to do with me? I asked when he finally stopped talking. Are you sitting at the corner table that you and your friends have been using all week? He asked. Yes. Then try not to be too conspicuous, but there should be a young guy sitting alone in the corner against the opposite wall. I suppose he's almost hidden from you behind that damned triffid plant. I casually glanced in the direction my new friend was pointing. Sure enough, there was someone behind the plant, but I couldn't make out who. Yeah, I think I see him. Well, I don't know what his game is, but that little asshole is watching you, my friend. I'm just nodding at you because you seem like a pretty decent guy, and I wouldn't want you to get stitches like I did. You are very kind, my friend, but I have no intention of straying from the righteous path. Neither do I, my friend, and actually I didn't, but that hasn't stopped me from committing adultery. Your wife, for some reason, thinks you commit adultery when you are outside the house. Never. I very seldom leave the house at all. This is my first trip in over a year, I informed him. Pretty strange, don't you think? Why else would this guy be following you? Are you following me? Yes, of course. He's been following you at the hotel for the last 3 nights. Nonsense, my friend. It must be pure coincidence that we both arrive at the hotel at about the same time every night. He doesn't stay at the hotel. He goes home just after 1 o'clock in the morning. Look, I can prove it to you. Finish your drink and leave the hotel. Walk to the Plume of Feathers. It's only a couple 100 yards or so. There are a lot of entrances there, so if he's following you, as I assume he is, he'll have to follow you inside the pub to make sure you don't slip out of one of them. If you stand at the counter itself, you can watch his entrance in the mirror behind it. As I left the hotel, I walked past the other guys and told them I'd be right back. Only halfway to Plume of Feathers did I wonder if I was doing the right thing. After all, there was a distinct possibility that I was setting myself up for a mugging or something. There were very few people around. I made it safely to the Plume and ordered a pint of beer. Sure enough, the young goon I cast a quick glance at as I left the hotel bar came in and bought himself a drink at the far end of the bar. He then took a seat at the far end of the room from where he could watch me. A few minutes later, my cell phone rang again. Was I right or not? Yes, I agreed. He's standing against the wall and trying to pretend he's not watching me. What are you going to do with him? Hell knows. Well, just don't do anything stupid, like let him know you spotted him, or chat up any of the backups. Let me think about it, and I'll call you tomorrow. But what if he's, plans to rob me or something? No, he's not like that. I'm guessing he's a college student moonlighting at some shady private detective agency. He certainly has no idea how to secretly spy on someone. I've never noticed him. You, my friend, are too much like me. The thought of losing your way doesn't cross your mind, and so you have no reason to be constantly looking over your shoulder. Your red-headed buddy, on the other hand, is alert and constantly scanning his surroundings. I'm a little surprised he hasn't noticed your shadow. Yes, the red-haired co-worker he was referring to is actually the office Casanova, and that's who I first suspected Sherry had come to the hotel to meet. After finishing my pint of beer at the Plume, I headed back to the hotel via the somewhat winding route that led along the river. I hoped I looked like I was out for an evening walk to get some fresh air. Back at the hotel, the guys were curious as to where I had disappeared to, but didn't question me. We then got busy making plans for the office and discussing what we hoped we would be able to accomplish the next day. Later, as I was leaving the bar and heading to my room, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that someone was hiding behind that damn plant again. Are you okay? My new friend asked, calling me the next day. Yeah, I'm fine, but I still can't figure out why that guy is following me. Do you want to know? Yeah, I guess so. Someone has to pay that bastard, and if my wife is spending my hard-earned money, I'm going to be really annoyed. Okay, leave it to me. There are several other divorced husbands working in the office I've been assigned to. I'll have to stay out of sight because the creep might recognize me, but we think we have a foolproof plan to grab the creep and ask him what he's doing without letting on that you know he's watching you. That would be pretty tricky, wouldn't it? No. The guys would trick him into thinking they were hired to watch you too and pounce on the guy. Hell, he's just a kid. He'll probably wet his pants. Either way, they'll promise him that if he confesses to them, they won't let whoever hired him know he blew the job. With any luck, he'll keep his mouth shut rather than risk losing his earnings. It was decided that I would set out again for Constitution at about the same time as the previous evening. Only this time, the way to the river was by a very unusual route, which led me into a dark alley. I confess that as I entered this alley, I wondered again if I had been mixed up in something unpleasant. Halfway down the alley, I noticed two dark figures lurking in the shadows. With some relief, I heard one of them say, "Keep walking. He's 50 yards behind you." I continued my walk, and nothing more remarkable happened to my knowledge. And when I returned to my room in the evening, there was someone behind the plant again. "Well, it worked, but it doesn't make much sense," my new friend's voice said when I answered my cell phone just after midnight. "Is that what he said?" "Yes, that's right. They couldn't stop him from talking." "Well, they seem like big guys to me." Everybody looks big in a dark alley at this time of night, my friend. But you just wouldn't believe it. I know I'm out of my mind. "Snap! Your little tail should pick you up from the office every night. He should follow you around until midnight. And then, when he's satisfied that you've gone to bed, he can scurry home." "That's it?" "Yes, he's moonlighting for the local detective agency, as we suspected. But they're not really interested in what you do or where you go, unless it's to the train station." "The railroad station?" "Yes, you know those things run on rails." "Well, yes, that's how I got here. There was no point in going by car." "The interesting thing is that if you get to the station, he keeps track of what train you get on. If it's a northbound train, he might drop you off and go home. If, on the other hand, you get on a southbound train, well, then he has a cell phone number to call right away." "Southbound, you say?" "Yes, I suppose you live on the south coast, my friend?" "I do." "But why would you want to get on a train going north?" "My sister lives half an hour from here." I guess that's bad news, isn't it?" "Yeah, do you have a number to call this guy?" "I'll send you a text as soon as we're done talking." "Thanks." "What are you going to do, my friend?" "I think I'm going to visit my sister tomorrow night." "Do you need any encouragement?" "That would be nice of you. I have no idea what I'm about to get myself into." "Text me the time of the train you're taking tomorrow, and we'll meet at the next station. Also, if you see two friends of mine, don't pay any attention to them, if you understand me. They are complete strangers to you, and it will be safer for everybody if it stays that way." "Is that really necessary?" "They are two very wicked ex-husbands, my friend. All you have to do is nod to them, and they will be happy to take care of anything you need after we are safely on the train and back here." "Pardon me?" "There are CCTV cameras in all stations now, my friend. Almost indisputable when an alibi is required." I didn't recognize the phone number my tail was supposed to call. It was a cell phone number. So even if I had tried to trace it, it would have gone nowhere. The next evening, after traveling one station northbound, I transferred to a southbound train, and my new acquaintance was at a station down the line from where I had started my journey. He reported that a young man had watched my northbound train depart, and then left the station, presumably to go to bed early. I saw no sign of the two large dark figures I had passed in the alley the previous evening, nor had my new friend mentioned them. We discussed, of course, what I might discover when I got home and what we would do if no one was home. My wife didn't say she was going out, so we decided that she was expecting guests at home. However, there was always the chance that I would call and chat with her in the evening. I had already done that once that week, and come to think of it, my wife seemed a little distracted. She admitted to me that she was in the middle of a TV show, had turned off the sound when the phone rang, and was trying to follow the program using the captioning feature. Constance always followed those stupid soap programs on TV, so I accepted her explanation. By then, I wasn't so sure anymore. In fact, I was racking my brain trying to remember what else I heard in the background during the conversation. Some half-heard sound kept me on edge, and a couple times I thought that maybe Constance had covered the microphone with her hand. She also giggled at one point in our conversation, but I figured she was laughing at something in her soap. I looked around, but it was just the two of us, getting off the train at my home station. My new friend must have noticed this. "Don't worry, they're already here. They came by car earlier." As we walked towards my house, my companion started talking to himself. For a few seconds I thought he was crazy, but then I realized he had one of those blue teeth in his ear. Apparently he was talking to two dark shadows. No! He informed me that we had better stop somewhere for a while. Constance was still alone, but she was waiting for someone. When I asked him why he was so sure, he told me that 5 minutes ago she had opened the door of the built-in garage and rolled our car out into the street. "Looks like her guest intends to stay all night," he commented. We spent some time peering into storefronts in that area of town, where we couldn't be seen from the road until my companion announced that the game was on. We then headed towards my house, and my companion stopped me from barging in there like the proverbial bull in a china shop. He pointed out that tonight was probably not the first night Constance had visitors, so there was no point in closing the stable door after the horse had galloped away. We need to give them enough time to get a proper handle on what they're about to get into. That way, we can get the evidence I'll need when the case goes to trial. My companion was evidently more experienced in such matters than I was, so I took his advice. We lingered in the garden for about 20 minutes until my impatience took over. Then I crept to the window of the back parlor. Fortunately, the curtains, which Constance was so pleased to discover, had shrunk a little when she was washing them. I had not time to pull the steps apart again and correct the frilly cord so that they closed completely in the middle. I never thought Constance was capable of such a thing. He was one of our local councillors, no less, and a potential parliamentary candidate for his party at the next general election. Our current MP has already announced that he intends to resign. It is quite clear that Constance was doing what a certain former U.S. president described as "do not engage in sexual relations." I was somewhat at odds with that. I only found out that the bastard's name was Tony Copeland because Constance was delivering circulars to his political party before the last local election. Constance was not an ardent supporter of that party, but inexplicably became involved in the last local election campaign. I have wondered ever since whether Constance's affair with Copeland was the result of her working for the party during that election, or whether her sudden interest in local politics and elections was the result of her and Copeland's affair. I must admit that I will probably never know the answer to that question. I suppose I was still pondering that question when my companion pulled me away from the window. The last thing I had time to see was Constance's head rising and falling. As we moved away from the house, my companion handed me a small video camera with a strap around my neck. He explained that once we were inside the house, I should keep the camera pointed at Copeland and Constance for as long as possible. But if Copeland tries to attack me, I should just let go of the camera and defend myself. He reminded me that the camera will continue to record, even if it's just hanging on a shoelace. And no matter what I said or did once we were in the house, I was in no way to threaten physical violence to any of the perpetrators. "If he attacks you, smash his head in, I don't care, but don't raise your hand to him first. I will keep this camera on you at all times to prove that you did not attack him, and I will try to keep the camera on both of them at all times." "2 cameras?" I asked. "Yes, that's my business, selling video cameras in bulk. Didn't I tell you?" "You haven't told me anything about yourself. I don't even know your name." "That's better if you decide later that you want the boys to run the business." After sneaking into the garage and quietly deflating all of Copeland's car tires, we went through the fire door into the kitchen. From there we could see and record what was going on in the living room, where Copeland had by then returned the favor to Constance. It took all my self-control and companion's influence not to rush into the room and use my right shoe to make Copeland sing alto from that day forward, or perhaps castrato. Be that as it may, my obliging friend convinced me that neither the right shoe nor the carving knife from the kitchen shelf would be conducive to my own long-term well-being. In his view, HMG's extended holiday homes are places you visit, not facilities you'd like to spend 10 or 15 years imprisoned in. How the hell Constance didn't notice us standing there recording the scene, I just don't understand. Then Copeland seemed to tire of his labors and climbed on top of Constance, though she objected, saying he hadn't gotten off her yet. Personally, upon reflection, I decided that was pretty damn unsportsmanlike of him. Copeland told Constance that he couldn't hold back any longer and started fighting her off as hard as he could. Oddly enough, Constance told him to calm down and sort of hinted that he had hurt her when he did that. Their conversation didn't make much sense because Copeland interspersed almost every word he said with two words, "Goddamn bitch," and Constance repeated, "Oh shit." In all the years I'd known her, I'd never once heard Constance use profanity. Usually when we made love, she'd say, "Oh God." I always took that as a compliment, but maybe I was wrong. Copeland had been at it for several minutes when the cell phone on the coffee table rang. Copeland put the receiver to his ear and said, "Hello." Things started to look comical from there. Of course, I could only hear one side of the conversation. What the caller was saying to him, I have no idea, but I think I got the gist of it. "How did you get this number?" Copeland demanded. "No, I have nothing that I want to report to any newspaper." "How dare you, young man?" "If you make accusations like that in your newspaper, young man, I'll get you your own damn job." Constance stopped her movements and looked at Copeland. She must have sensed something in his tone. "Now, look at this. I'm visiting a local resident on official council business. It is my responsibility as a councilman to assist—" "That is none of your business, young man. Her husband knows perfectly well that I'm here today." At this point in Copeland's phone conversation, Constance's gaze suddenly returned to the mirror on the wall, and a look of horror appeared on her face. "Steve! Oh God, no! Steve!" She screamed at the top of her voice. Constance's sudden cry caught Copeland by surprise, and he looked up at her. I can only assume he realized she was looking at something reflected in the mirror, because he shifted his upper body to one side so he could see me and my companion. There have not been many occasions in my life when I have seen real fear in someone's eyes. But that night, I saw fear in Copeland's eyes. I don't know if he turned off his cell phone or not, but I do know that in a panic, he pushed Constance away from him with such force that she fell to the floor, hit her head on the coffee table, and briefly lost consciousness. I must say, I've never seen anyone change into dress uniform so quickly. Copeland then found his jacket and threw it on. My companion dragged me further into the living room as we continued to film Copeland hurrying to leave the house. I later realized that my companion had led us out of the kitchen doorway to clear Copeland's path to the garage where his car was parked. Holding his shoes in one hand and his underwear in the other, Copeland rushed past us into the garage. Soon, I heard him yell, "You bastards!" Meanwhile, my companion told me to check on Constance, but at the same time warned me to keep an eye on her, while he kept an eye on Copeland. From Copeland's shouting, I figured he had discovered that his car had 4 flat tires. Anyway, I heard the roller garage door open and he tried to drive away. By this time, I was beside Constance, who had just regained consciousness, sat up, looked me in the eye, and immediately passed out. In doing so, she once more banged her head unpleasantly against the floor. From my point of view, Constance didn't seem to be having the best evening. I decided I'd better call medical help for Constance, so without taking my eyes off Constance, I went to our landline and dialed 3 9s. I was answered that an ambulance and the police were on their way. Indeed, I heard the sirens even before I hung up. Oddly enough, I was still standing there filming a semi-conscious Constance when a paramedic burst into the hallway. "Time to leave, my friend?" My companion returned and gently nudged me towards the door. He also put sunglasses on my nose and a huge trilby on my head, which he pulled tightly over the sunglasses. I have no idea where he got these things, and was somewhat surprised to see that he was now dressed the same way. I realized why as we left the house through this garage. A TV crew, local news I realized, and several reporters were waiting to pounce on us. They peppered us with unanswered questions as my companion led me to a waiting cab. Some stranger stood between the reporters, my companion and me, and kept repeating, "My client can't make any statement right now." As the cab took us to the train station, I looked at my companion. "What you have told me is all nonsense?" I asked him. "No, my wife stitched me up as I promised, but her lawyer, well, he was an asshole. You only met him tonight." "Copeland?" "Yes, Copeland. And last week, a buddy of mine who does private investigations told me that a certain Tony Copeland contacted him and wants you followed. My friend didn't like the job, it didn't make sense to him, and Copeland wouldn't explain what it was about, so he turned it down. But my friend, knowing of my hostility to Copeland, warned me of his desire to be kept in the loop if you showed the slightest inclination to come home, a sort of surprise. Well, it was quite obvious, wasn't it? It didn't take a genius to put two and two together to realize what Copeland's game was. Sorry about the press, but I wanted to make sure that Copeland's political aspirations were over. I hope this doesn't benefit his law business as well. Actually, once they get their claws into that bastard, I'm sure the press will quickly forget about you and your wife. There's plenty more juicy dirt in Copeland's past for them to sink their teeth into. No. We were traveling north on the train when my companion informed me that Constance was in the local hospital. Hairline fracture of the skull, his companion thought. He then asked me if I wanted anything done to Copeland when the police were done with him. I looked at him with a question in my eyes, and he explained that Copeland had found that driving a car with 4 flat tires was not easy, and he had crashed into at least 3 parked cars and ended up parking in a store window. Copeland was last seen being hauled away in the back of a police van. My interviewer, who apparently was still in touch and receiving cell phone messages from eyewitnesses at the scene, was short on the exact reason for Copeland's arrest. He simply called it a traffic violation. It seemed reasonable to me at the time. Driving a car with 4 flat tires certainly can't be legal. I later learned from television and newspaper reports that Copeland panicked when he saw the garage door lifted and television crews and members of the press gathered outside. He stood in the garage in his undressed state, while my companion blocked Copeland's access to the switch that would close the door again. Then, a panicked Copeland jumped into his automobile and drove away, or, more correctly, attempted to drive away. The brief description I read in the press said that his car was certainly on the road, but hit the TV crew's van as it left my house, and numerous other parked cars as it drove down our street. Then, when Copeland tried to turn onto the main road, he apparently collided with a passing truck. Apparently, the collision with the large vehicle gave Copeland's car the momentum it needed to crash into the storefront. Too bad our cab was going the other way that evening. I would have loved to see the carnage with my own eyes. As we drove, my companion informed me that this evening would probably be our last meeting, but he also said that, if all went according to plan, I would hear from him in the future. He apologized again for the unfortunate publicity, but said he needed something spectacular to let the dogs off the chain. It was many months before I realized what he was talking about. I'll come back to it later. At one point, as our train was crossing a bridge over a river, my traveling companion threw the cell phone he was using out the window. He told me that I would no longer be able to reach him on that phone, nor would anyone else. "Keep the video camera. I have plenty of others." He smirked. "What about the movie and those two?" "Set!" "I'm sure the chip in that camera is enough for what you need, Steve. I have plans to record in them, and I may have to interfere a little, but don't worry. Your wife's face won't end up in the papers." "Who cares?" I said. "I do, my friend, and I'm sorry it will happen. No man likes everybody to know that his wife was a whore who hung up on him for God knows how long. It's not good for our ego, my friend, I assure you. Such is human nature." My companion got off the train a couple stops ahead of me. He shook my hand, apologized again for the publicity and any other repercussions I might accidentally face in the future. He assured me that he would do his best to minimize them, but didn't specify exactly what he thought might happen. One last time, he handed me a business card and told me it was the business card of an attorney I had at my home. He was a good man and could be trusted. I was to use his services for my divorce, if I decided to go through with it, and for any other unforeseen circumstances. Then the train left the station, and I never met him in person again, but I was to hear from him and see his face again. But I'll tell you about that a little later. The night man at the front desk caught me as I was entering the hotel and handed me a package marked urgent. I took it with me to the bar where, truth be told, I was going to eat my fill. Who could refuse under such circumstances? At the bar, I tore the paper out of the package and discovered that it contained the packaging from the manufacturer of the small video camera I now had in my pocket and a printed note. Essentially, the note instructed me not to get drunk. I was to go to my room and make at least one copy of the camera's memory card file on my laptop, and better yet, several others on whatever media I had on hand. I also asked that I not keep the copies and the original in the same place. Sipping my whiskey and ordering a chaser, I did as the note said. I burned one copy of the file to a DVD, which I later removed and put in the hotel safe, and sent the second copy to my sister. I only managed to make 2 extra copies because I only carry a couple of blank DVDs and CDs in my laptop sleeve. It was probably just morbid curiosity that made me watch the pantomime one more time before I lay down and tried to fall asleep. In the end, I didn't succeed. God only knows how I looked the next day, but everyone in the office tried to stay away from me if they could help it. About mid-morning, 2 plainclothes police officers came into the office wanting to have a quiet talk with me. I took them to an empty office where we could have some privacy. They explained that there was a disagreement about how Constance, who claimed to remember nothing about the night before, had suffered a skull fracture, even though it was only a hairline fracture. From the way they talked, I realized that someone had assumed that I'd been acting rather aggressively the last time they'd seen Constance and me together. They didn't say who had claimed that, of course, but it wasn't hard for me to guess. They refused to confirm or deny that it was Copeland. It took me a while to find the right moment in the recording, at which point I asked if they wanted a copy. Actually, they asked to take the original recording, but I told them I had no intention of letting the thing out of my possession. They eventually agreed to a copy, which I made while they waited, on a DVD that one of the computer guys had given me. While my laptop was doing the DVD, I asked one of the girls to get us some tea, and the officers and I struck up a friendly conversation about the previous few days. That's if you can have a friendly conversation with an on-duty police officer at all. They showed a lot of interest in my mysterious friend, but I think it was just curiosity on their part. The videotape proved that he didn't hurt Constance either. In fact, the cops wanted to know if Copeland could be charged, because he had pushed Constance away from him pretty hard. They said they would ask the CPS representatives to look into it. I said I think they were just interested in who had a grudge against Copeland and why. They said I should be on my guard and suggested that Copeland was a pretty powerful lawyer. At the same time, they sort of hinted that they had reason to suspect that Copeland wasn't exactly honest in all his dealings. "Sleeping with other people's wives, for instance," remarked I. "Oh, and not only that, Steve. We just can't make sense of the creep. Let's just say he's unofficially on a lot of cops' interest lists, but if I may say so, you seem to be taking all this somewhat lightly, Steve." "What else am I supposed to do, officer? Lose my temper and start beating my chest? If I behaved as you suggest, wouldn't you be leading me in handcuffs to your car right now?" I asked. "Yes, Steve, I think I would." The officer smiled back at me. "I can tell you from experience that when the stew is spilled and things turn to shit, it's best to laugh, or at least try to do so. It really helps those who wish you distress." Both officers laughed and shook my hand as they left. After lunch, I went in search of a working phone booth and called a lawyer a friend had recommended to me. He was expecting my call and simply asked if I was going to get a divorce right away. When I replied that I had no other option if I wanted to stay on the radar in the future, he simply said he would get down to business and then asked if he could send one of his staff over to me later that day. She would need to know all of Constance's details and my personal details. I asked him if I should give this woman a check to pay for his services, but he informed me that was already taken care of. Don't ask Steve, but you will never get a bill for my services. Someone we both know intends to pay for all of Copeland's expenses, and he, as you know, comes from a very wealthy family. And he's made a lot of money himself, only not all of it is strictly legal. And now, in the evening, the whole crew was waiting for me at the bar, obviously hoping I had calmed down enough to tell them about the evening before. By then, they had all read the day's papers. I thought it was funny that I hadn't seen a single abandoned newspaper in the office after the first morning call. I told them the short version. When I got home, I found Constance doing somersaults with Tony Copeland. They asked how it had all been covered in the press, but I denied everything I knew about how it had happened. It was the plain truth. I really had no idea about the whole thing. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the evening when my new lawyer, an extremely good-looking but also very capable assistant or assistants, came to the hotel to meet me. We walked to the hotel library to meet privately. The first thing Miss Clarkson, yes, she was one of those types, told me was that she had already spoken to Constance and advised her to get a lawyer herself as soon as she was released from the hospital. It will be much easier if the lawyer himself explains to him that he can't stand on his own 2 feet. Your wife doesn't want a divorce, do you know? Yes, I know. Please look at all these messages she sent me today, I replied, showing her my cell phone. Has she tried to call you? Yes, but I'm very busy. I suspect that's what she and Copeland were counting on. Quite right. Copeland has been after her for some time now. She claims he's only been successful this week, but, well, in my experience, people tend to be stingy with the truth when it benefits them. It's unlikely he'd be following my movements unless he had reason to believe he'd get the opportunity to put Constance to bed. Screw it. I think that's the word you were looking for, Mr. Marshall? Steve, Miss Clarkson, everyone knows me as Steve. Very well, Steve, but I'm afraid that to everyone but my fiancée, I am Miss Clarkson. I imagine a very handsome man, and a very stoic Steve, believe me. Oh, I do, Miss Clarkson, I do. She smiled at me for the first time, changing her businesslike expression, but then returned to the reason for her visit. Surprisingly, she already knew almost everything there was to know. Miss Clarkson pulled a piece of paper out of her briefcase and sketched out a list of questions. Constance, and my full names, date of birth, our wedding, and so on. I watched as Miss Clarkson simply ticked off the correct answers she had already typed out. There were a couple of minor errors, but nothing more than that. Everything was in place, including the value of our house, but not the contents of our bank accounts or the details of our savings. Not that I could remember them in any detail myself. Miss Clarkson then placed a form in front of me that I was to sign. Essentially, it was a contract that asked her boss to act on my behalf in Constance's affairs and my divorce, as well as any other legal matters, whether they related to our divorce or not, until I terminated the contract in writing. Before leaving, Miss Clarkson suggested that I call Constance and talk to her. In fact, I had verbally made it clear that I had no intention of forgiving Constance for her act. She also said that I could find Constance at her sister's house. Your house is being watched by the press. You might feel more comfortable if you found another place to sleep this weekend, Steve. Miss Clarkson had always been a little uncomfortable addressing me as Steve. By the way, your employer is doing a fine job and is rather vague about your whereabouts. I wondered who, and more importantly, when had asked them to do that. After Miss Clarkson left and I was secretly questioned as to who my delightful visitor was, I went up to my room to call Constance. The boys were a little shocked when I told them that Miss Clarkson was a representative of my attorney. None of them could understand why she was coming to see me at this hour, and they even wondered how much legal representation would cost me. The call was answered by June, Constance's sister. Our conversation was short and concise. All June could say was that she was personally sorry for what had happened and hoped we could remain friends. She then said she would go and get, that stupid cow. 4 words that I think express June's attitude toward her sister's behavior. A year or so later, while on my honeymoon in Malta, by coincidence I ran into June again, but I'll talk about that too later. The press apparently only learned of my whereabouts after I spent the weekend at my sister and her family's house. My sister and her husband were sympathetic and didn't pry any details out of me. Heck, they'd probably read most of them in the papers anyway. Sunday night when I got back to the hotel, I was handed a restraining order. I couldn't understand what it was about, but over the phone, Miss Clarkson explained that Copeland had obtained an emergency restraining order prohibiting me from releasing to the press any of the material made that night, or putting it on the internet. Come on, I couldn't make sense of all the legal nonsense they were spouting at the best of times, but at least Miss Clarkson got the point across to my thick skull. "But I didn't do it, and I wasn't going to," I replied. "We know, but someone else did and still intends to do their best to embarrass Copeland." "Oops." "Yes, and you can expect to be summoned before a high court judge tomorrow morning, but don't panic. We've got it all covered." "Glad to hear you're not panicking. That's what you pay us for." "What can a high court judge do by sending me to jail?" "Well, yes, but I told you we had it under control." On Monday afternoon, I found myself in the courtroom, and there was a very angry judge standing in front of me. I didn't utter a word. My attorneys, several, dressed in wigs and gowns, did all the talking. I informed the judge that an anonymous third party was in possession of 2 recordings, similar to the one I had, taken at the same time. To my surprise, the police photo analyst confirmed that the photos in question were not stills from the recording I had made. Incidentally, we are talking about 2 photos that somehow made it into the hands of the national press. I believe that if Copeland had done nothing, only less reputable and sensationalist publications would have printed them. And eventually they were printed, along with all the other newspapers and media outlets that were able to get their hands on these bastards. Both photos showed Tony Copeland. In neither photo was Constance recognizable. The judge seemed to have a hard time believing that I had no idea who my mysterious companion was that night, and practically stated so. In the end, however, he seemed to agree with my reasoning, and he reminded me, actually informed me, since I didn't understand the court order handed to me at the hotel, that there was a temporary moratorium on the release of all recordings made in the house that fateful evening. I was then told I was free to go. It was damn hard to make my way through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse. Copeland had managed to get an emergency injunction on the grounds that they were in a private home, and he argued that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy. At least, that's what was said. The newspapers vigorously fought the publication ban, and I strongly suspect they were assisted by my lawyers. When the case went to a full court hearing a few days later, the judge quickly overturned the ban. The gist of the judge's decision was that the house belonged to me, not Copeland, and that he had no right to privacy within its walls, especially in one of the common rooms. And since the people who took the notes were me and my guest, even if I didn't know the person from Adam, Copeland couldn't object to them being in the public domain in whole or in part. Well, I guess that's what the judge said. Most likely the whole shenanigans only increased public interest in the story, because all the newspapers and television news programs ran with the headlines, and more than I expected, showed these 2 photos and several more that appeared in the days that followed. When the court eventually acquitted them, the gory headlines and stories attached to those photos were, from my perspective, brilliant. One of them read, "Caught in the Act." Another read, "Cowardly Retreat." And the attached story explained how Copeland calmly dressed himself while his mistress lay unconscious on the floor beside him. However, it was obvious that whoever took the footage from the video and released it to the press was very careful in their actions. Constance's face was either cut out of the frame altogether or blurred. I think it's safe to say that after my antics with the high court judge, things went back to normal. I worked in the new office for the second week and then returned home. However, I found that I could not stay in the house, so I settled temporarily in a small hotel not far from work. In the meantime, Miss Clarkson had reached me and informed me that she had been contacted by a lawyer working for Constance. From what Miss Clarkson told me, I understood that Constance was being stalked by the press guys. They must have found out she was staying at June's house. Anyway, Miss Clarkson informed me that Constance's lawyer had told her that his client didn't want a divorce, but if I insist, Constance is willing to accept the terms I offer. "We told him your name is not Hamilton," Miss Clarkson said with a giggle. "Hamilton," I repeated, not sure what that meant. "Bloody hell, Steve, get over it. What year is it? Trafalgar, Nelson, Lady Hamilton." "Oh, yes, very funny." I lied. There was no way I could understand what Miss Clarkson was talking about. Anyway, Miss Clarkson told me that Constance was in a hurry to get it all over with. Perhaps she thought it would somehow lead to the press leaving her alone. But in fact, I think the press switched to other issues long before the matter of our divorce really came up. Although there did get a small headline about it in the inside pages of our local press. I agreed that everything would be split in half, provided Constance was willing to admit that her adultery was the sole cause of the breakup of our marriage, and she would agree to be a witness in any further proceedings I might decide to take against Copeland. Somewhat surprisingly, Constance's attorneys asked me to agree to appear in court as a witness in the case she had brought against Copeland. This confused me until Miss Clarkson informed me that it was likely a personal injury suit and that the videotape we had made, a copy of which had already been given to Constance's attorney, would be enough for Copeland to settle out of court. I guess he did, because I never heard from him again. The house was sold very quickly, as the market was very good at the time. Constance took the few things she needed, and I put everything else in storage until I found another house I liked, but I didn't have time to look. Living in a hotel might not be fun, but you get used to it. Less work, no cooking, and it was cheaper than paying a mortgage. I even had free parking right downtown. Occasionally, some reporter would track me down, and I was even willing to talk to them. But they didn't seem interested in Constance and me. They all asked me what I really knew about my mysterious friend. I couldn't tell them anything, I'm afraid. But several people with whom I got on very well confided to me that they thought there was something in Copeland that was not yet known, and that they thought it must necessarily concern my mysterious friend, and I gave their calling cards to Miss Clarkson. Although by that time she claimed she was not personally acquainted with the man either. That didn't quite fit with some of the remarks she had made to me earlier in the course of our acquaintance, but she used the words personal acquaintance. I don't know for sure. It may have been 2 or even 3 months since that fateful evening, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, I was sitting at my desk one day, looking at my computer screen as usual, when my desk shook from someone sitting on it. I looked to my left and saw a pair of knees covered by a gray flannel. Looking even further to the left, I noticed that the flannel fabric extended almost all the way down to my Nike sneakers. Looking up, I saw an oversized blue sweater topped with a tuft of blonde hair and a pair of oversized black horn-rimmed glasses. "Hello, handsome boy. What's a nice gentleman like you doing in a dive like this?" Sherry asked. "Hi, Sherry. Long time no see. What are you doing in these parts?" replied I. Sherry explained that our company had become one of her employer's largest clients, and she was assigned to visit us 1 day a month, literally to walk around and talk to employees in different departments, just to see if there were any program changes she could suggest to make their lives easier. "So, what can I do for you? I'm fine with it as it is." "Yeah, you'd be the first to let them know if you weren't happy. No, Steve, I'm here to collect a debt." I have no idea what expression appeared on my face, but it caused Sherry to giggle. "Hey, handsome, you owe me dinner." "Really?" "Yeah, that's right. You told me you couldn't take me out to dinner because you're a married man. And from what I've read in the papers, you are not married anymore." "I am?" "Well, not in so many words, but the gist of what you said in the hotel bar that night was exactly that." "Yes?" By this time I was trying to keep a confused expression on my face. "Come on, Steve. Can we stop messing around?" I can't remember what you said to me the other night." "Steve." "All right, beautiful. I haven't been outside in weeks. This will do me good. Where do you want to go?" "Oh, nothing much. I have to catch the train home just after 9. What a disappointment. "Dinner," I said to Steve. "Behave yourself." Damn. Why do you pretty boys always talk like that? I'll be in the waiting room when you pass out. She smirked. Then she slid off my desk and left the ward. As before, Sherry's transformation was remarkable. It was impossible not to notice her as I stepped off the elevator. I don't think any of the men passing through the waiting room while she waited for me could have missed her and probably wished she hadn't waited for him. The two security guards she was talking to, both were in their late 50s or 60s, were clearly fascinated by Sherry. As I approached, she pulled away from them and took my hand. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the hotel first. I need to change." "No time, handsome. We have less than 4 hours. My train leaves at 9. No, but, Steve, we have a lot to talk about." I agreed, and accompanied by one of the guards who insisted on carrying Sherry's bag, we walked to my car. After stuffing my briefcase and Sherry's into the trunk, I drove us to a public house outside of town, where I knew food was served all day. We talked for a while and ate leisurely. Sherry wasn't so much demanding as inviting me to speak up and share my thoughts. I don't know what it was about Sherry, but I felt I could talk to her, and instinctively knew that my words would not become public the next day. When I spoke, Sherry took me by surprise, going on the offensive and telling me why she had lured me out of the evening dinner. "Steve, you've got to do something about yourself, my friend. All the female coworkers in the office say you're not the fun guy you used to be. Of course, they all admit they can't blame you for the circumstances, but frankly, they'd like to see some sign that the old Steve is still in you." "I'm not with you, Sherry." "No, I don't think you see that yourself. Steve, you've always been fun to work with. Even I realized that when we worked on the same projects." What, 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 4 or 5 times. And even then we never worked closely together. You do realize that for years now, all the women in your company have been taking their man problems to good old Steve in logistics and planning. And from what I hear, some of the guys also turn to you for advice about their wives and girlfriends. That's news to me. Anyway, even so, I no longer have what you'd call a good track record in marital relations, do I? Silly Steve. Everyone came to you because you showed them how to laugh. Well, at least see the funny side and laugh at things. Apparently you were an ace at advising girls on what to get their men for birthdays and Christmas. And you weren't shy about advising them to dump those with no hope of success, as well as telling them how to dump them. Did you know, for example, that unofficially the HR girls tell the new girls that if they have a problem with any of the office gigolos and don't want to file a formal complaint, they should find you and have a chat? That's news to me, but I can remember. Yes, I suspect you can. But Steve, everyone is afraid to say even 2 words to you now. They say you walk around the office like a bear with a sore head. They miss the old Steve, the one you could laugh and joke with. Look, we all understand that you're upset, but living in this damn hotel and not going anywhere, well, it's just not right. Not for you anyway. You need to get out and, start dating again. There are plenty of eligible women in the office. Sherry, I think I understand what you're saying, but didn't you tell me that dating coworkers is bad news? Besides, we're going out tonight, aren't we? Yeah, we're having dinner, and I asked you out, remember? Yeah, but who's going to end up paying? I smirked back at her. See, this is the same Steve that girls can't get away from at the office. The guy who sees the funny side in everything, even if I'm about to order the most expensive dessert on the menu. Sherry smiled back at me. I understand your point, and I'll try to leave my personal problems at home from now on. Do something better, Steve. Get yourself a nice apartment or something, and go out in the evenings. Even risk asking out some of the eligible women in the office. Look, I avoid coworkers at work because, well, sometimes I can look a little cheap when I dress up to go out and have fun. Some Romeos take it the wrong way and think I'm frivolous. I'm sure you know what I mean. And like I said, trying to teach the average man how to use a computer program when he looks at, my cleavage is usually not very successful. I've seen that from my own experience. I, of course, challenged Sherry to say that she would never look cheap, and we both smirked at each other. Then Sherry ordered herself a dessert. Not the most expensive one on the menu, by the way. Oddly enough, after that we started talking about Sherry's life and aspirations. I learned that she is 22 years old. To be honest, I had always assumed she was around 19, which was a bit silly of me. I had first met Sherry when we were opening an office in Wales, about 18 months before, and she knew her onions even then. For some reason, perhaps because of the way she dressed, I thought of her as a perpetual teenager. The first time I saw Sherry dressed for going out was the night I told you about, when she was meeting that young electrician in the hotel bar. I drove Sherry to the train station to catch her train, and she thanked me for a good dinner and a pleasant evening. Then, getting on her train, she said we should do it again sometime. I think I agreed with her. The next day at the office, I struggled to put a smile on my face when I remembered it. You know, it must have worked. I noticed that after a day or so, people stopped leaving the tea room as soon as I crossed the threshold, and those who had avoided my desk since then no longer did so, and often stopped to pass the time. That same lunch hour, I visited several real estate agents and got a list of furnished apartments for rent. I guess I was still a little shy about buying, and if independent apartment living didn't work out, I could always go back to the hotel. I guess that was the thought that was going around in my head. That Thursday, I got a call from Miss Clarkson with an interesting question. "How do you like 250,000, Steve?" Those were the first words she said to me. "I'm sorry, but I'm not with you, Miss Clarkson." Copeland is obviously not thrilled with everything the press says about him. The man has something to hide. Anyway, things are quietening down in the press, and we thought this would be a good time to hint that an attachment alienation case may be in the offing. I suspect that Constance's legal advisors have also threatened something, but I can't be sure. Anyway, Copeland's people came back with an offer of $50,000 for us to leave. We discussed that offer, and now it's up to $250,000. We might even be able to squeeze another $25,000 out of those creeps if we nail them to the wall. Go ahead, Miss Clarkson. Take every penny you can from that scoundrel, but preferably settle out of court. Constance is not my favorite person in the world just now, but if I disgrace her in court, it will not leave me indifferent. Very well, Steve. The press will probably find out about it anyway, but you know the form, an undisclosed amount. It's almost as good as if Copeland had admitted that he— Yes, I was going to use your description of him for a moment. Not a week later, Miss Clarkson informed me that I would be £300,000 richer as soon as I signed on the dotted line. I immediately went there and put my signature on it. While I was doing this, Miss Clarkson hinted that Constance might soon be buying herself a new house, and that she would probably pay cash for it. Miss Clarkson still did not know on what basis Constance had stitched up Copeland, but she suspected it was probably a personal grudge. A week or so later, I moved into a perfectly acceptable apartment. It was further from my office, but it came with free parking, which was in great short supply in the area. It was a 2-bedroom suite with a large living dining room and a surprisingly spacious, well-equipped kitchenette. The washer and dryer were in the bathroom, but the room was big enough that you hardly noticed them. I don't know if it was the money Copeland put in my bank accounts, or the fact that I tried to follow Sherry's advice. But by the end of the month I was feeling much better, and every once in a while I'd go out for a drink after work with one of the guys. There were 3 of them sitting at my desk. A co-worker who had been with the company not too long ago, maybe a month or so, and Bob, my boss. I was just showing them a spreadsheet I was working on when the computer screen went blank. After a second or so, the dreaded blue screen appeared, but it was blank. Then, words started appearing in the upper left corner, one character at a time. "Hey, Steve, guess who's buried here in the depths of hell and playing with the servers?" Almost panicking, I quickly started typing, "Sherry, I'm in the middle of something. I have people with me." Almost instantly, a message came through. "Oops, sorry folks. Official business? Honestly. Steve, are we all set for today?" I was surprised when my boss reached over and started typing. "Hi, Sherry, this is Bob. Sure, Steve's taking you out for an evening stroll. That bastard doesn't get out much these days." A message came in reply. "Cheers, Bob. Same place and time, Steve. And remember, my train leaves at 9. Then the screen went blank again, and then my spreadsheet reappeared. "Sorry about that," I said to my boss. "For what?" he replied, and then added, "Nice girl, that Sherry." Our new coworker sat there with a perplexed look on his face, but finally asked, "Who's Sherry?" "Someone a little closer to your age than mine," I told him. "Tell that to Steve." Bob said, "She's just right for you. Boy, you need someone to brighten up your life a little." "Bob, I'm 12 years older than her." "So 12 years between friends? Jesus, buddy, you're too fixated on numbers." After that, we went back to the calculations in my spreadsheet, making small changes here and there and seeing how they would affect the bottom line. It was probably half an hour later when the spreadsheet disappeared again. And another message appeared. "Excuse me, Steve, do I need a chaperone for lunch today?" "He'll meet you in the reception area at 12. Bob typed the text. "Thanks, Bob." My spreadsheet came back up again. "Will I be there?" I asked Bob, probably annoyed that he'd scheduled 2 face-to-face meetings on my behalf. "Of course you'll help. It was a request for help. And when have you ever turned down a lady? Whoever asked you, the old Steve would have said yes." "Have I really changed that much?" "No more than would be expected under the circumstances, my friend. But lately we've been seeing the old Steve gradually coming back. Now, let's get to those numbers." I quickly realized why Sherry had asked me to go to lunch with her. She had her coworker with her, who I assume had ambitions of his own. He was certainly annoyed that I was interfering with his work during their lunch break. I'd say he was also disappointed to learn that Sherry and I were having dinner together in the evening, and therefore would not be riding back with him on the same train. Sherry did her best to stay on the opposite side of the table from her coworker. Frankly, it surprised me that he didn't know what he was talking about, but perhaps he was thinking too much about himself and his charms, as is typical of some young men. Later, I went down to the back room where the company servers were located, and had a few words with him when Sherry wasn't around. As I walked up to my floor, it dawned on me that it had been a long time since I'd had a conversation like that with any of the gigolos in the building. When I met her in the reception area, Sherry looked as ravishing as she usually did after work. That evening, another security guard took the honor of carrying her briefcase to my car. Sherry told me that her coworker at work that day was new to her company, but he knew her from college, or rather, was well aware of how Sherry looked in civilian clothes, as she liked to call them. She also thanked me for everything I had said to him during the day. In the evening we, or rather Sherry, did a little shopping and then had a quick bite to eat at a fast food joint. I was feeling pretty tired after walking through all those damn clothing stores when I put Sherry on her train that evening. Is it really so necessary for women to try on every article of clothing they come across? I guess I liked watching Sherry come out of the locker room to ask me how she looked in skirts that seemed to be getting shorter and shorter. You know, guys, there comes a point when you have to take the bull by the horns and say that a skirt borders on obscenity. And then what do? They buy it. You know, if I had realized this a little sooner, I wouldn't have been so hungry when we finally walked into that fast food place. Over the next 6 months, my divorce became final, and I began to adjust to living on my own. I dated the guys from the office from time to time, but most of them were young and didn't mind hanging out. Don't think I wasn't looking, because I was. I just couldn't find anyone who, interested in me. My dates with Sherry became routine. Don't think there was anything romantic about them, because there wasn't. Sherry would tell me how her life was going and ask me what I did in my spare time. Often she chided me for not asking this or that woman out when I mentioned them. Sherry seemed to think that if I mentioned a woman, it meant I was attracted to her. To some extent that was true, but I couldn't find it in me to start dating again. I thought I was too old. When I mentioned this to Sherry, she started teasing me, calling me old man. The morning after Sherry's fall, as I was walking to the office, a newspaper headline caught my eye. It turned out that Copeland had been arrested the day before. I bought a copy and tried to read it as best I could on the go. As is usually the case in court-ruled Britain, the accompanying article didn't say much. Only that Copeland had been arrested and charged with conspiracy and perverting the course of justice. The article went on to list a whole bunch of other people from around the country who had also been arrested. One young woman was charged with perjury on multiple counts. 5 women described as ex-spouses were arrested and charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice. The newspaper article mentioned that several other ex-spouses had allegedly fled the country, and at the time the article went to press, extradition papers were being prepared. 7 other people were charged with various offenses, including conspiracy, aiding, and abetting. The article goes on to say that 12 ex-husbands were deferring divorce payments. My understanding is that this means they will be retried at the conclusion of the aforementioned cases. I can't claim to have followed the developments, but the gist of it was that the same young woman was featured in numerous divorce cases across the country, claiming to have had an affair with her husbands, and in one case, her wife. In each case, the reporter cited a story very similar to the one my mysterious friend had told me all those months ago, and each case involved a rather large sum of money. Eventually, I saw my mysterious friend again, and he was in the background of a television movie. A reporter was standing on the steps of the High Court in London announcing that Copeland and his conspirators had been found guilty on all counts. The next day, Sherry came again. This seemed somewhat unusual to me because she usually came on Thursdays, and today was Tuesday. Moreover, she stopped by my department and waved a pair of theater tickets in front of my face. "What are your plans for this evening, Steve?" "Well, nothing much." "Okay, you can take me out to dinner, and then I'll take you to the show." "You'll miss the train home," I remarked. "No, I won't miss it. There's one that leaves just after midnight. I'll catch it." After a few seconds, she added, "The last bus is leaving now, but Papa will pick me up from the station." The dinner was delicious, and the performance was good. All in all, it was a lovely evening until we arrived at the train station. We both looked at the departure screen, and it appeared that there were no trains northbound until 5 in the morning. Sherry went over to the schedule and whined. She was wrong. All the previous trains had left a few minutes after 1 o'clock in the morning. The last one, however, for some reason was leaving 10 minutes before 12. "To hell with it," she said. "I'll have to stay." "Right. I'll call my old hotel and see if they have a room available," I suggested. "Don't be silly, Steve. I'll lie down on your couch and catch the early train in the morning." Yes, we argued about that, but I didn't see anything wrong with her staying in my apartment if she wanted to, so we didn't make a fuss about it. No, we argued about which one of us would take the couch, and I tried to play the role of gentleman. In the end, Sherry outweighed my arguments, saying she'd rather sleep on the bench at the train station than force me out of my bed. Back at the apartment, I found a spare sheet and decided to bed Sherry, using as a blanket my old sleeping bag that I kept in the car just in case. Don't forget that I had to dry it in the dryer for 20 minutes. It had been in the trunk for a very long time. While the dryer worked its wonders, Sherry and I had tea, and she took a close look around my apartment. Sherry had looked into my apartment a couple times before, when we took home frozen food and other things I bought to put in the freezer. While she showered, I made a damn uncomfortable, in my opinion, bed on the couch. A heated argument briefly broke out over which of us would sleep on it, until Sherry repeated her threat to go back to the station. After showering, we said goodnight to each other, and I headed for my bedroom. And I don't know what time it was when something woke me up. Yes, there was no doubt about it. Someone was blowing gently in my left ear. "Sherry," I asked. "Yes, Steve." "Looks like you have the wrong bed, young lady." "Are you objecting, old man, or are you just stating a fact?" "Stating a fact, I guess." "All right." "But Sherry, Steve, if you say one word about the 12-year age difference between us, well, we'll start our married life off on the wrong foot, won't we?" "Married life?" "Yes. Now, come on. Show me what an old man can do." I wasn't surprised when Sherry didn't rush first onto the train. I'd already realized that she'd set me up quite effectively. As we walked to the office, Sherry explained that she was taking 4 days off to train new employees in the accounting department. In fact, she didn't get home until Sunday night, and she also informed me that there was an opening at her company that could be filled almost permanently by someone who worked at mine. Not full-time, of course, just 3 days a week, and it would be a very flexible schedule. No problems with taking the kids to school and things like that, Sherry added. Kids, sighed I. Of course I want at least 2, and you'll be a great father to Steve. Gosh, well, that's all right then. For one awful minute, I thought you were going to say 12. See, that's what I like about you. You always see the bright side in everything. We were on our honeymoon. It was the time between sessions when you lay in each other's arms, too excited to sleep, but too tired to go back to the site. Sherry, I asked, how long were you going to be my wife? That's a good question, man. I guess you could say I saw a headline in the papers about your first wife and that Copeland guy. Oh, so soon? Yes, but if you want to accuse me of conniving, you might even question my motives for encouraging that fellow John to hook me up for dinner that night at the very hotel I chose. I've had my eye on you for a long time. I'll have to keep an eye on you, won't I? Yes, old boy, but don't take me for Constance. I know what I want when I see it, and I'll never do anything that might mean risking losing it. Epilogue. Well, I've already mentioned that in Malta, Sherry and I ran into a very surprised June, so I suppose I should tell you what she told me. June said that she thought there was an underlying submissiveness in Constance that Copeland had somehow recognized and picked up on. June noted that in reading the newspapers, she had come to the conclusion that many of the women involved in his divorce proceedings seemed to be under some sort of male influence. I hadn't followed the details of the case, so this was news to me. June said they all seemed to want to take full responsibility for everything, even though Copeland was the only person involved in each case. I don't know what that man's got, but he can get some women around, said June to me. But Constance has turned against Copeland and sued him, hasn't she? I remarked. Constance is my little sister, Steve. I've always taken care of her, and perhaps it's my fault. Perhaps the fact is that Constance has always obeyed my wishes. I pushed her into this ordeal. I don't think she would have had the guts to see it through if it hadn't been for me. Fortunately, Copeland relented and made an out-of-court agreement. I don't know how Constance would have behaved had they been in a courtroom. By the way, is this your new fiancé, Steve? Sure is. Sherry chased me down and caught me. She made a very good choice. June smiled back at me. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.